Back on Morning Line, final segment as we're talking your legal rights as a tenant with Zac Oswald of the Legal Aid Society. A lot of folks facing evictions and the like. We had another caller waited through the break, I think is Vera. Let's take her phone call. Vera, good morning. Are you there, Vera?
Yes, I am. Listen, I've got a question about HOAs for the attorney there.
Yeah.
I've got a cousin, and she's too shy to ask anybody anything, but she compares her HOA to like a communist organization, whereas there are central members in the HOA that always have things done for them, but people where the HOA property affects their properties, they don't do anything. And one of the latest things that she's concerned about, because she's heard that HOAs, if the state laws change in your state, can foreclose on your property and force your removal and sell your house and take possession because you violated the deeds and covenants. That's why she's afraid. But here lately, there is something that's going on in her HOA where they're going to do something to only a few members of that HOA's property that appears blatantly like an enhancement to their property, and then make all the other members pay for this over a number of years. And she's on a fixed income, and she's wondering if she can get an attorney. And do you do this? An attorney to bring a class action lawsuit against the HOA for failure of fiduciary duties. So I'll take your answer offline.
Okay, thank you. All right, Zac, I knew we'd probably get some HOA calls. A lot of people have headaches with those. Do you have any recommendation for her?
Yeah, I've got two recommendations, and I'm looking one up so that I can give the right phone number real fast.
Cool.
But
Okay.
you know, there are two things that I would recommend right now, and that is first to call Legal Aid Society to see if we might be able to help you, even if it's just to give you advice on what's going on. And the way to reach out to Legal Aid Society if you're in Middle Tennessee is to call us at 1-800-238-1443 and just ask, hey, I'm looking for an attorney. Are you guys able to help me? We will actually have you put in your zip code when you call in, and that'll send you to one of our 8 offices in Middle Tennessee to make sure you're connected to the right one. The other one, she mentioned a class action lawsuit. Legal Aid is not able to do class action lawsuits. There's a federal rule prohibiting us. But if you're looking for an attorney in the greater Nashville area, there's also an attorney service called the Nashville Lawyers Referral Service, and you can call them at 615-242-6546 and call and just say, hey, I'm looking for an attorney to potentially sue my HOA. Hey, who can you hook me up with?
Sounds good. Thank you for that, Zac. Listen, just as a final segment, and I don't know, I think maybe we've touched on some of this now, but you, from where you sit, if you're having a conversation with some renters out there, what would you tell them are their most important legal rights that maybe, and I don't know, maybe some are aware of them, some of them aren't, when it comes to dealing with landlords? What important things should they be aware of legally that provide them protections, maybe that they don't know?
I think the things that I would point out to renters who just want to know what's going on, the first is that the first place that they need to look to know what their rights and responsibilities are is really their lease agreement. That's going to lay out the general outline of what is available to a tenant, what they need to do if they need to contact their landlord, what the landlord's responsibilities are in the situation.
Let me ask you this real quick, and I know I apologize for interrupting. With regard to that point, which is excellent, the lease, in your experience, I mean, I don't have a situation where I have a lease anymore, but I did in one time, and usually I just said, how long is the lease, and I signed it. How often do tenants take the time to read the entire lease? Am I an exception to the rule, or do most people just say, okay, 6-month lease, I'll sign it?
Most people just sign it, and I don't blame them for that, because the other half of that is if a tenant reads it and they say, hey, I don't agree with this rule, and they talk to the landlord's probably going to say, I got 6 people waiting to sign this lease agreement. I'm not going to change this for you anyway. So I understand why a tenant would go ahead and sign it, but there are really important things in there. A lot of things, very often we're seeing tenants who are trying to move out of their property, and they say, hey, I gave the landlord 30 days notice, but they're charging me for an extra month of rent. And I'll look at their lease agreement and I'll go, actually, your lease says that you have to give your landlord 60 days notice before you move out. Things like that just people miss because they haven't looked through it. quite as accurately as they need to.
Okay, so definitely go through the lease, look at it, and if it's written in there and you signed it, okay, at least then you're knowledgeable and you know it's 60 instead of 30. So that's a good point. What other points besides obviously looking closely at the lease? And you're right, by the way, if you don't like the lease, the landlord in this marketplace is going to say, well, I ain't changing it because I got a bunch of other people that aren't going to worry about this and they're going to take it. So it's up to you. So I don't know how much good that does besides letting you know what to expect down the road. What other thing would you suggest that just, tenants need to be aware of?
The second thing that I see getting tenants into trouble is quite frankly Google lawyering. They'll say, hey, what can I do in this situation? They'll Google it, and they're seeing laws from Massachusetts, from California, from Oregon. One of the things that any tenant in Tennessee needs to hear from me is that in Tennessee you don't normally have the right to withhold your rent because the landlord's not making repairs. If your landlord's not making repairs, you don't pay the rent. The landlord's going to evict you for non-payment of rent. It's really unfortunate that tenants don't have that remedy in Tennessee because we get plenty of calls about conditions. But I see all sorts of tenants who say, well, in Oregon, I can X, Y, Z. And it's I'm sorry, we're 2 time zones away.
Yeah. Okay, that's an excellent point. You got to be careful where you get your legal advice. Anything special with folks that maybe have pets that are renting? I don't know. I mean, I guess that would be in the lease and it would specify what you can and can't do with what kind of animals, right?
Yeah, most of the stuff when we're dealing with specifically pets is going to be in the lease agreement.
Yeah.
If you're somebody with a disability who needs an assistance animal, what I would say is you have the right to request a reasonable accommodation, even if your landlord says, hey, we don't allow this sort of animal or we don't allow pets. Assistance animals are not considered pets, but you want to be really careful about the documentation that you're using for that. We see a lot of tenants who get themselves into trouble because they sign up online for certification that my animal is a service dog. Most of those companies are fraudulent, and we don't want to see tenants that are paying for service animal certifications that aren't real. They bring them to their landlord, and the landlord says, this is nothing. And then they're in a situation where they paid out to this fraudulent company for this certificate that means nothing.
Right.
And there's still not any further with the landlord and potentially getting evicted for having a dog who shouldn't be there.
Okay. And one last question for you, just with regard to a tenant wanting to break a lease. Okay, we talked about leases and how it's locking you in on certain things, but what type of legitimate cases can come up where you would be able to legally break the lease? I'm just throwing out there, like you discover a bunch of black mold that's not been addressed or something like that. What could you actually say, look, yeah, I'm out of here and I'm breaking this lease because of this, and maybe have it stand up legally?
Yeah, so there are a few situations, and you've mentioned one that I'll touch on. Certainly somebody who's in military service is going to be able to break their lease if they need to deploy. There are situations where domestic violence survivors are going to be able to break their lease because they need to get away from the abusive situation. There are going to be situations where people who have disabilities might be able to break their lease so that they can go to somewhere that may be able to better accommodate their disability. And then, Nick, what you mentioned, repairs aren't being made. I mentioned earlier, you don't want to withhold rent for those repairs. What you want to do is you want to request in writing that your landlord fixes those things. And if the landlord doesn't fix those things within a reasonable amount of time, then what that means is that the landlord has already broken the lease. That gives the tenant the right to break the lease, to move out and to move somewhere else. What I would suggest to any tenant in that situation, though, is to talk to an attorney first. If you qualify for legal aid, that's a great time to call us to say, this is the situation I'm in. Can you please give me some advice to get through this? And you can call us at 1-800-238-1443, or even visit our website at www.las.org to look for some of the times that we've got free legal clinics. Those are times where people can actually come in and talk to an attorney for free to say, hey, I just need 15 minutes of your time to get some legal advice about this situation where I've got black mold, my landlord's not fixing it, and I want to make sure that I can break my lease without the landlord coming back and suing me for a termination fee for all the months of rent that I still owe for the rest of the lease agreement, those sorts of things.
Real quick, you probably don't have a number off the top of your head, but in general, I know during the pandemic, at the height of it, there was a moratorium on evictions. I know the sheriff's next to me here and said, I haven't done evictions in months, along those lines. But as we sit here right now in the marketplace we're in, Zac, do you get a sense how many active eviction notices are out there in Middle Tennessee or in the Nashville area as we speak right now? I mean, how many people are facing potential eviction right now in the city of Nashville?
So I couldn't give you a contemporaneous number to just say right this moment, this is how many evictions are out there. But Nick, you're right. The eviction moratorium is over. We are basically back to business as usual in Middle Tennessee in terms of what cases look like. And I know that in 2019, before the pandemic, we were around 10,000 eviction cases being filed per year in Davidson County. And so I would anticipate that we're back up around that number. We're in June, so somewhere around 3,000 to 5,000 evictions have likely been filed in Davidson County this year, just based on historical data.
Wow. Okay. Well, and I was wondering if it's even worse than before the pandemic, and we'll see certainly with the marketplace the way it's changed. Zac, listen, I really appreciate you coming on this morning. Some good legal advice. I think a lot of people had some good questions, and I'll make sure we pass on the number for the Legal Aid Society. Thank goodness for you guys. Keep up the great work, and thank you for coming on this morning.
Thank you so much for having me, Nick.
Much appreciated, sir. We'll talk to you again. We're going to take a break. When we come back, programming note right after this. Stay with us.